Okay, let's talk about Clair Obscur. For those of you who've been living under a rock for the past several weeks or so, Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is a 2025 game by French indie developer Sandfall Interactive. It plays like a modern turn-based RPG in like this dark fantasy Belle Epoch type world. I personally found the core hook to be super chilling. It reads, "Year by year, she erases us." In this setting, an entity called the Paintress draws an ever-shrinking number in chalk, and everyone at or above that age vanishes. We play as the surviving youths, who send an annual expedition every year to hunt her down. This fantastical premise literally enacts generational conflict. The youth literally seek to preserve themselves by confronting the force that systematically purges their elders. Looking at Clair Obscur through a generational lens makes sense because each generational cohort in the real world tends to develop its own culture. For example, one analysis notes that 4 living generations in today's society meet the definition of being different cultures, with each fundamentally having different worldviews. By analogy, Expedition 33 treats age groups as if they were different castes on a doomed island. For clarity, we'll use generational diffusion to mean how traditions, knowledge, and attitudes pass between age cohorts over time, and generational obsolescence to mean how older ideas, values, or technologies become outdated or even discarded by succeeding generations or even actively wiped out, as in the game. These contexts will guide our analysis as we explore how the game's story, characters, mechanics, and visual stages an allegory of inheritance and decay. Chapter 1: Narrative and World Building. The game's lore explicitly dramatizes inherited burden and decay. We learn that on the isolated island of Lumiere, the Gamage has afflicted people for 67 years. Each year, an entity called the Paintress paints an ever-decreasing number, and all humans with an age equal to or above that number disappear. In other words, the threshold age of survival drops every single year. So the older generation is literally erased to make way for the young. The surviving community's response is always the same. They send a volunteer expedition across the sea to slay the Paintress before she can set the next number. Expedition 33 is just the latest in that cycle. We join Gustave, who's 32, on the morning of the Gamage as he mourns his now vanished lover, Sophie, who turned 33 on that day. With only 1 year left to save himself, Gustave signs up for Expedition 33, desperate to stop the cycle that had claimed so many before him. This setup embeds the idea of cyclic history and succession in world building. Each year's volunteers know they may never see the next Gamage. They are cyclic inheritors who learn from previous expeditions, successes, and their failures. Indeed, the official description urges players to follow the trail of previous expeditions and discover their fate, as they embark upon a desperate quest to break the Paintress's cycle of death. In other words, they must navigate a legacy of incomplete missions. Symbolism abounds in these motifs. The ever-falling age is a stark measure of time running out, not just for the individual, but for the culture itself. And as every year passes, the society literally resets. No one ever grows old, so their elders' memories always die with them. A key revelation in the story underscores how generational knowledge can be lost or distorted. At the climax, the heroine, Maëlle, a reincarnation of a vanished girl, reads a letter explaining that the Paintress was actually stalling the real villain, the immortal Renoir, who invented the Gamage. Worse, the ominous number the past expedition saw was not a death sentence, but a warning of who was about to die. In other words, generations of islanders completely misread their fate. They believed each year elders were being erased by a monster, but in reality, Renoir is just testing them. This narrative twist highlights how stories and records can become garbled over time. The world seen by Expedition 33 has inherited a broken history, a legacy where knowledge is fragmented and must be reinterpreted by the youngest of characters. Throughout the setting, concrete symbols of aging and decay disappear. For example, the game takes place in Old Lumiere, a faded Belle Epoque-style metropolis that once thrived with light, a French city idealized as a place of optimism, but now chafes under this curse. In flashbacks, we learn of the real 20th century Paris, where a family of powerful painters create a magical canvas world, Lumiere, filled with painted copies of themselves. Over time, the desire to move on with grief and guilt causes them to purge older copies of their world. Literally, Renoir, the surviving elder, believes that destroying the oldest parts of this painted reality will free his family from a cycle of loss. Here, the canvas is a meta symbol of cultural inheritance. It keeps old worlds alive, but those worlds can become decaying prisons if never allowed to fade. Clair Obscur thus weaves its lore to make literal burdens of legacy. Characters tread through the remnants of past ideals. The Belle Epoque nostalgia equals the canvas world that are at once beautiful and moribund. forcing players to ask what must be preserved versus what must be relinquished. Chapter 2: Character and Theme Dissection. The expeditioners and their foes personify generational archetypes. Gustave, Maël, Lune, and Ciel, the main party, are young people with something to prove. Gustave is resourceful, but burdened by the loss of loved ones. Maël is literally the youngest, and as it turns out, a reincarnation. They represent the new generation, skeptical but determined. By contrast, old Renoir, voiced by Andy Serkis, and the mysterious Verso, voiced by Ben Starr, embody the immortal older generation. Renoir is a literal first-generation survivor, an ancient soldier who stopped aging when the first expedition landed. He is driven by ruthless determination to protect the old order at all costs. Verso, meanwhile, initially appears as a helpful stranger, but is soon revealed to be Renoir's immortal son and a dissatisfied companion. He has grown weary of endless life and questions why they can never just let go. In this way, Verso and Renoir are living avatars of generational stasis. They carry all their ancestors' burdens literally in their bodies, and their motivation centers on preserving or letting go of that legacy. Through these characters, the game explicitly sets up a tension between outdated ideals and new wisdom. Renoir clings to the myth that the Paintress must be killed, believing her to be the cause of everyone's pain, an approach inherited uncritically from his days as the leader of the first expedition. Verso, initially bound to protect his old mission, eventually rebelled, symbolizing a younger mind rejecting a worn-out belief. Maël straddles both worlds. She has the innocence and optimism of youth, but also the memories and power of a past painter lineage. Even the minor characters reflect this divide. Esquier, the gestural Minoko, etc., all nod to older traditions, magic, and myth that younger heroes must either learn from or overturn. The game asks whether generational transmission is positive or harmful. On one hand, characters find allies in their elders. Verso helps the party fight Renoir, and Maël ultimately uses her inherited power to give the expedition a second chance. This can feel like a celebration of learning from history. On the other hand, the narrative criticizes blind obedience to the past. The real villain turns out to be Renoir himself, who perpetuated the Gamage out of grief and refusal to adapt. In the climactic choice the player makes, either Maël can stay in the old canvas or Verso destroys it. If the youth uphold the world of their elders, the world begins to show decline anyway. But if they reject it outright, they wipe out all that remains of the past and risk losing everything. The ambiguity suggests that in the game, neither wholly celebrates or condemns generation transmission, but actually shows its complicated costs on either side. Knowledge can be a guide, but unexamined tradition can become really toxic. Chapter 3: Gameplay Mechanics and Systems. Unlike in the narrative, the game's mechanical systems do not literally age characters or simulate an annual countdown. Instead, generational themes are woven into the design metaphors. Consider the New Game Plus feature. Once you finish the story, you can restart the whole adventure with upgraded characters and equipment. This reinforces the idea of replaying history or passing experience to a new generation of the same heroes. In effect, the players are mimicking a cycle. Each playthrough is a new Expedition 34, 35, etc., and learning from the previous run. Each character's progression also contains subtle allusions. Each party member has a unique combat mechanic that mirrors their character. For example, Verso gains perfection ranks the longer that he fights aggressively, reflecting how his lengthy experience rewards persistence, whereas Ciel uses a deck of magical cards to forecast attacks. More explicitly thematic are the equipment systems. Characters collect pictos, little painted runes, that unlock bonuses called luminas. The very names picto for picture or lumina for light echo the motif of painting and light versus dark. Equipping these pictos feels like arming yourselves with fragments of the old world's magic, and as the characters master them, they unlock new potential, suggesting that the pieces of the past can enlighten the future. For a more direct parallel, the Camp Rest system allows Verso to talk to his younger comrades and raise their relationship levels. This can be read metaphorically as passing knowledge and trust from one generation to the next. As relationships grow, new skills and quests open up, just as in a real family or a guild, one might gain access to secret wisdom by earning their elders' confidence. Gameplay also includes clear analogs to inevitable decline. All characters level up in the standard JRPG way, getting health, attack power, etc., but there are no magical items to stop time. Eventually, Maël starts showing signs of decline if she rebuilds Lumiere. In narrative terms, this could be reflected by the late game fatigue that sets in as the player avoids completing story quests. The choice-based ending, and the usual feature in RPG, emphasizes this mechanic to a T. The system forces you to face the end of the journey one way or the other, rather than indefinitely prolonging it. Overall, the mechanics of repeated playthroughs and generational skill transfer underscore the theme of cyclical resistance and passion of the torch. New Game Plus implies that each generation of playthrough carries some legacy from the previous. Similarly, the way characters eventually gain power to permanently change the world, for better or for worse, echoes a passing responsibility. One generation must decide whether to relinquish or propagate the old order. Chapter 4: Visual and Aesthetic Language. The very title Clair Obscur refers to Chiaroscuro, the artistic technique of contrasting light and dark. As defined by Wikipedia, chiaroscuro is the use of strong contrast between light and dark, usually bold contrast, affecting a whole composition. In visual art, this creates drama and depth. The dark areas hide mysteries, where the bright areas draw focus. In the case of Expedition 33, this aesthetic is literalized in lighting and color. For example, in one gameplay scene, Luna's glowing spell lights up the whole surrounding gloom, while deep shadows enclose the rest of the forest. Every spell and every lantern casts bright headlights against murky backgrounds. The game's art direction is suffused with this light and dark motif. Characters often appear as silhouettes against dim vistas, or step from darkness into pools of gold light. The very island of Lumiere lives up to its name only where the protagonists bring hope. The rest of the world is shrouded or clouded by the gamage. This visual contrast mirrors the themes of fading relevance. The glowing lumina magic and vibrant costumes of the young heroes stand out vividly against the somber, decaying settings of old cities and battlefields. By lighting the struggle itself, casting characters as beacons amid the shade, the game constantly reminds the player that the struggle of each new generation takes place in the shadow of the previous's extinction. The chiaroscuro design reinforces the inherited legacy themes. Light sources feel like fragile gifts passed between characters. Darkness feels like the unknown that they have unknowingly inherited. For example, the canvas world of the older generations is tinted with a sepia gloom and overgrown with creeping vines. Only when the players strike it with bright resolves, the truths emerge. In the cinematic cutscenes, we often see characters half illuminated, visually splitting them between past and future selves. Altogether, this stark art style is a constant, wordless hint that Clair Obscur is as much about illuminating what's been lost as it has been about the shadows that are on the wall. Chapter 5: Cultural and Meta Context. Beyond its fictional world, Clair Obscur echoes real generational anxieties of our own time. Modern society is rife with fears that one generation is burdening the next. Climate change is the obvious example. Young people today often express ecological grief and resentment over older generations' inaction. In one recent study, about 45% of surveyed youth said climate change caused them personal anxiety and distress in their daily life, and roughly 75% found the future deeply frightening. That sense of fear directly parallels Expedition 33's doomed world. The Islanders literally have a shrinking time horizon, so they live with existential dread each and every year. The Paintress's erasure of elders can be read as an allegory for how looming crises threaten to erase the world inherited by the young. Technological upheaval also provides another parallel. For instance, 41% of Gen Z report feeling anxious about AI, even as they keep adopting it, while 36% find it exciting. New platforms and jobs are being invented while old industries die out. This blend of generational obsolescence, the skills and norms valued by baby boomers and Gen X, can seem irrelevant to Gen Z. Clair Obscur dramatizes this by showing the older generation literally made irrelevant by design, and by making the player feel the urgency of an unforgiven clock. Institutionally, too, Expedition 33 resonates with our world's concerns. The notion of a decaying Belle Epoch reflects the fears of a once great system now falling apart. The island's elite repeatedly failed to stop the crisis, much like global leaders often criticize in our world for stalling on climate and technological regulation. And the game's final message, that simply perpetuating the old order leads to inevitable decline, invites reflection on whether our own institutions need fundamental change. Other works have tackled similar themes. For example, NieR Automata asks, what happens when all the humans are gone and androids inherit a broken legacy? Death Stranding explores reconnecting a fractured society amid ruins. Even films like Children of Men envisions a future without children, forcing characters to question the value of hope. Clair Obscur sits squarely in this tradition. By literalizing generational extinction and rebirth, it prompts players to contemplate our real-world generational dynamics, and our fears of being left with obsolete societies and technologies. Hey, if you like what I'm doing here, please subscribe. It really helps out the channel and encourages me to keep making more amazing videos like this. Have a good one. In conclusion, Clair Obscur is an amazing game, and you should definitely play it despite the fact that I pretty much spoil it in this video, but it ultimately delivers a meditation on the cycle of knowledge and oblivion. Its core scenario, a mother figure erasing her own progeny's elders, is stark, but it serves to highlight subtler truths. that wisdom can be both a blessing and a burden, and that each generation inherits both the light and the shadows of its past. The game doesn't hand us any easy answers. In one ending, preserving the old world dooms it. In the other, breaking the cycle annihilates everyone and everything, but leaves hope in a blank slate. From playing the game, we take away a sobering reality. Cultural continuity is fragile. Knowledge passed down can illuminate new paths, but leftover dogma can choke progress. In Clair Obscur, light stands for the human spirit and inherited wisdom, while darkness represents the erasure of people and memory. We learn that true renewal may require letting go of even cherished traditions, a wind of change that, while unsettling, is the only way to watch the sun rise again on a new generation. In the end, players and critics emerge reminded that every society must balance reverence for its forebears with adaptation to the new. Expedition 33 dramatizes what happens when that balance is lost. When one side clings to the shadows, the other races toward oblivion. Its narrative and design are a cautionary fable about generational obsolescence. Preserving the light of culture requires passing the torch wisely, lest it burn out and be snuffed out forever.